Welcome back to Project U 2.2. I'm Carrie, and today's episode is something every one of us will face at some point: loss, change, and the long, hard road back to ourselves. My guest today is someone who has lived through those valleys and come out stronger, more open, and more human than ever. David Hulings is an author of 5 books, a leadership and life coach for more than 30 years, and a powerful storyteller. His latest book, The Archetypes Attend a Funeral, is a memoir and a mirror. It helps readers explore grief through the lens of universal human archetypes, blending personal loss with deep lessons about growth, healing, and transformation. David has faced the unthinkable, the death of his son, and through his writing, he explores grief, healing, and the human experience in a way that invites us all to reflect on our own stories. Somehow, he has found purpose through pain and even laughter through tears. David is one of the most entertaining and enthusiastic people I have ever met. David, I am so honored to have you here today. I get to share your story with the world. Welcome to Project U 2.2.
Well, thank you. That's a humbling set of words you just did. I'm privileged to be here. Anything I can do to help people who are going through some bit of a transition and trauma and grief, anything I can do to help.
Thank you. We're going to start light. I know you're a Starbucks guy. What's your go-to drink?
What time of day?
Ooh, let's go.
Let's
go morning.
I have 3 drinks: a simple Americana on ice, and then I have a salted caramel espresso shake, something like that. And then I have what I have right now is my afternoon drink at 3 o'clock is my acai, and you've caught me during my acai day moment right here. So those are my 3 drinks.
Nice.
Yeah, I'm wasting all my kids' inheritance on Starbucks.
I love that. I think that a person's coffee drink tells so much about them. My dad drinks his like strong, plain, and black. And that's my dad. He's just a simple, strong man. And yours is a little bit all over the place with lots of character and lots of moods. And I feel like that represents you and your leadership.
There you
great.
go. Yeah, it depends on where I'm at for the day. But those are the 3, and I tend to do all my work in Starbucks. I've written all 5 of my books in a Starbucks. I have to write with people around me, so I go to a Starbucks and write. I edit in private, but when I compose and write, it has to be at a Starbucks. So there you go.
I love that.
In fact,
a man of routine.
The first book I wrote, Just Middle Manager, I was writing at the Starbucks here in our local town. And when I was writing it, they came in and said they were going to redo the thing and take away the tables and put new tables in. And I said, you can't take this table. This is where I wrote my first book. And the manager of the Starbucks gave me the table, and it sits out here in our little coffee nook, a table from Starbucks that I wrote my first book on. So there you go.
I love that. So speaking of routine, you also are a man of routine when it comes to push-ups, and you've had some streaks going. So tell me about those. I believe that they're just a little competition with yourself. So tell us the story behind that.
Well, 16 years ago, I had a heart attack. And this doctor came in and he said, you need to get in shape. And I was a high school soccer coach, so you would think I was in shape, but I just kind of stood on the sideline, not really in shape. And I said, well, what should I do? And he said, push-ups. And I reacted to that because I was in the military as a drill instructor, and I would make people do push-ups for punishment. It was obviously for their training and discipline. And so when he said you should do push-ups, I was insulted first. Remember, I'm recovering from a heart attack, so I'm kind of out of it. The first year, Carrie, of recovery from that heart attack, I could do 2 sequential push-ups at a time. That was it. I could just do 2. It really stole a lot of my life that year. And so from that point on, I decided I was just going to start building myself up to do push-ups as much as I could out of spite to the doctor, to be honest. And so when I go to the cardiologist now, he says, how many are you up to now? And I can tell him where I'm at. And I'm doing 400 3 times a day. So I'll be over 52,000 this year. And I feel real comfortable. It's been a couple of weeks I've skipped. I had a heart episode a month ago and couldn't do anything, and so I'm not on track for what I want. But so I do them now, and I just kept building up 5 and 6 or 7 more for this year, and then 5 or 6 more for the next year, and that's where I got.
I think it speaks a lot about your consistency and your dedication, your discipline for sure. And I can definitely see that military background coming through because that's a lot. That's a heck of a lot.
Well,
You often talk about your wife, Robin, and Robin is one of the sweetest ladies. And you talk about her with so much love and admiration, both in private and in public. So let's give your beautiful wife the spotlight for a moment and tell us one thing that she does that can still make you laugh after all these years.
uh, I was not expecting that one for a guy who can talk on his feet. I'd have to I'd have to think. Uh, when she tries to make a joke, it makes me laugh. Okay, she's very sweet, and she's not outgoing. She's not in your face like I am. She's always in the background. So when she says something funny, it's a rare moment that she decides to take the spotlight to make others laugh, and it just brings a smile to my face because that's kind of, it shows two things about her. She doesn't want the spotlight, and when she does, it's kind of awkward, but it's funny. So I guess you're probably gonna have to cut that all out before she hears that. I would so.
Oh, no, I think it's beautiful, and I just think it's amazing how the right person by your side just brings so much peace and light, and especially after everything that you have walked through.
For those that don't know the story, I was married to someone for 20 years, and they left me and my kids. And I literally would get on the floor every night and I'd say, God, can't you just give me a godly wife? Why can't you? With the implication was, can't you bring my wife back to me? And she pretty much just left. And so I met Robin in a very unique way. She was the nanny of my children, and I asked her to marry me, and she said yes, but it wasn't that easy, really. Her ex-husband had run off with my ex-wife, which made it a very awkward moment because she was watching my kids, and she needed someone to take care of her bills, and I needed someone to watch my kids. So I made a business proposition 32 years ago and said, I tell you what, I'll pay your bills, you take care of my kids, and we'll just walk away after the kids graduate from high school. And the next year or two, I fell in love with her, and we've been married 32 years. I think she's fallen in love with me by now. I think she's getting there. She's warming up to the fact. So it was kind of odd because everybody in town was like, what just happened? Our exes didn't stay together, but it was a business proposition.
A beautiful story, and it reminds me of my favorite movie of Pretty Woman, starting with a business proposition and going for
There you go.
going for
There you go.
the long
Few
haul. Oh,
dynamics different there, but yes,
yes, a few different dynamics.
that's
Yes,
what it was.
David, your
Yeah, it was a
your,
great time.
your newest book
Yeah.
is Archetypes Attend a Funeral. It's a powerful blend of memoir, psychology, reflection, and you share your journey through the loss of your son, which I can only imagine changes you and changed you forever. You've walked through a kind of loss that every parent fears. Can you take us back to what that time was like? And it wasn't very long ago. So what ultimately helped you begin to heal?
Well, I think I can take you back. It was 6 months. It was March 11th, and tomorrow's the 11th. So you can add up the days. I guess that would be almost 7 months now. And he had been having some trouble with his family, with his wife. His wife had found someone else, and that was devastating to my son, as it was to his father decades before when his mother left me. So I was just here working, and all of a sudden, it's kind of interesting, Carrie. What happened is my client that I was talking to said, "You know what, David? I don't need to talk anymore." And I'm like, "What do you mean you don't need to talk anymore?" It was really weird that she would just stop. And I said, "Okay." And then I looked up, and at that very moment, I got an email from another client that was supposed to come the next hour at 1 o'clock. And she said, "I don't need to meet today. I want to cancel." And I was like, well, that was just weird. And I walked out the office, and my wife said, Robin said, hey, I'm running to the store. You want me to drop you off to get your car at the car dealership? It was getting fixed. And all this is happening all at this time. I got in my car at the dealership, and the car was ready. I got in my car and I'm heading home. And I got a text from my other son who said, you better get to Andy's house fast. And I said, why? And he said, I can't tell you. I don't know. And he lives just past me here. So I started going north, and then my daughter, his older sister, called and said, Dad, you better get to Andy's house fast. And apparently he had posted something on his Facebook about taking his life. And I got there, I searched the property, and then I found him probably 10 minutes after he had taken a gun to his temple. And I cannot tell you the feeling, because I think those are pretty suppressed. I can only know that I instantly went into how do I make this, I don't want to say good because that's impossible, but how do I handle this? How do I help my kids, his six siblings? How do I help his kids? How do I frame this? And so I went into probably how I've been trained to deal with trauma, and started just working on how do I take this mess. And the page, I think the way I characterized it in the book was, it's somebody turned the page to a new chapter, but you weren't done with the other chapter. And suddenly you're in a new chapter and you had absolutely no interest of being there. You don't want it. He was gone suddenly. He was still breathing, at least I thought, but it was just his muscle spasms. And so there was some hope for a moment, but so that's what happened. And from that moment on, I went into the concept of how do I take this trauma and use it in a way that would glorify God, that would make me understand and be able to help people. And so how the book came about was, people came to the visitation, and I remember a lady, Carrie, coming up. She comes up to greet me to say she's sorry and offer condolences. And she said, David, how can I help you? I know you like Starbucks. Can I go get you a Starbucks? And I'm like, sure, go get me a Starbucks. And when she left, in my head, I went, oh, that's her caregiver, which is a primary archetype we all use. It's a human behavior to take care of people. And it couldn't have been more than 2 minutes later, a guy came up, and I coached my son and his son in soccer together. And he looked at me and he started hitting his hand with his fist. And he said, Coach, you're going to get through this. You're a winner. You're going to battle this. You're going to get the victory. And of course, I'm numb. But as he walked away, I'm like, oh, that's his warrior. His warrior came out. And it wasn't probably sometime in this whole thing, an older couple pulled me off to the side all by themselves. And they whispered really low, David, we've been through this. We lost our son the same way. You're going to learn so much. We want to meet with you later and teach you what we learned. And as they walked away, my head went, and this is just how I think because it's my training, oh, that was the sage. They want to teach me something. And so this happened the whole 3 hours of the funeral and the visitation. And so when I got home the week later, I said to Robin, I said, you do realize the archetypes all came to the funeral, right? And she looked at me somewhat sad and somewhat, I don't think she was angry, but she said, only you would take this moment with our son's death to think of archetypes. And I said, no, you don't understand. And I explained to her everything I just said to you. And she said, I can see that. I said, I just think I'm going to write a book entitled The Archetypes Attend a Funeral. And she then laughed and said, well, that would be a cute title. I said, well, sweetheart, it can't be cute. It's on grief and trauma. How cute can you make something like that? And so it wasn't 8 days later. I sat down, and in the next 8 days, I wrote the book and then sent it to the publisher, and they liked it. And
very interesting, and how much of your training, just looking at the psychology of people and all of our differences and unique qualities, and I'm sure too that writing that book was also therapeutic for you in dealing with your own grief and your own pain.
yeah, I had a class last week with some people about trauma, and what happens. And one of them reached out to me this morning, and she said, David, I haven't quit crying since I left the class last week. And she said, I can't help it. And it was about bringing trauma up and what to do with it. And so what I told her to do was I told her to start writing her thoughts down. And it's interesting what happens when you have something in your head. Your mind is doing exactly what it was designed to do, and that is hold on to it so you don't ever forget, so you don't ever get in a situation again. And so by writing it down, it releases it out of your mind, and it allows you to see it kind of in black and white. And it's kind of a trauma journaling approach. And I found it so refreshing to write down what I was experiencing through the lenses of these 12 archetypes that I work with. And it helped a lot. And this client emailed me a little just before we came on. She said, hey, this is really helpful. I'm writing these things down. And I'm like, that's what you need to do. Writing down is a very powerful thing to do when you're in trauma.
Mm-hmm. That's wonderful. And I know have a couple of clients who they just get
Yeah.
stuck for years in their grief. And so pushing through that, it isn't a linear way out of that hole.
Yeah.
It's filled with that messy
Yeah.
middle.
I don't know whose illustration this is, but I heard it years ago. Grief is like a big steel ball in a little box. And it just sits there, and every time it touches the edge, you feel it. The ball never leaves the box, but you can shrink the ball and cause it to not touch the edges as much. And so that's what happens. Like last Friday was would have been Andy's 44th birthday. And so I had a really hard time the night before because I didn't know what to do. The lover archetype memorializes everything. It holds on to things. So I have a place behind me where I have things about Andy on the desk. And I was like, how do I memorialize his birthday? I hadn't even thought about that. And then I woke up the next morning, and Robin had gone out and bought a whole bunch of boxes of Swiss cake rolls. Andy loved Swiss cake rolls. And so I sent a picture to all the kids, and we decided that Friday, November 7th is Swiss cake roll day to celebrate Andy, which doesn't go good with my heart or my push-ups. That was kind of a way to memorialize him. That's the lover archetype. I'm holding on to a piece of him, and it just brought a smile to my face when I walked out, and here's all these Swiss cake rolls. She found the perfect way to honor him and to heal the hurt that I had. So holding on to some of those memories like that are both, it's like a double-edged sword. You want the memory, but you don't want the memory. But you don't want to let the memory go because that means it's gone. And so I think that's part of the lover archetype is how do you memorialize and cherish the memories and avoid the cutting that they feel in your heart so much when it happened, when you remember that.
It's interesting how when you work and talk with different people, that pain can be used as a teacher. And it might feel like a punishment, whatever you're going through in the grief and the time, but learning from it, I think so many of us, like you said, resist the truth because it feels unfair. And to remind yourself that growth can happen during that time and of those places that we'd rather not look.
Yeah, it's interesting that when you have, where this really hit me, it was not just my psychology, Carrie, but my theology. I grew up in a Christian home. My dad was very, very much an abuser, but he was a Bible Baptist preacher at the same time, which is kind of conflicting. And so I grew up with this faith. And it's really interesting that I do some teaching in our church. And the Sunday after Andy took his life, he took his life on a Tuesday, I was scheduled to teach, and the text I had to teach was on joy. And our pastor came to the emergency room where we had obviously brought Andy's lifeless body, and he said, hey, you don't teach on Sunday, we'll take care of it. And I said, no, I have to. Christ died so I could have joy in every moment of my life. And it might have been the hardest. I mean, I've spoken for the last 40 years to hundreds and hundreds and thousands of people. This is just our little church of 200 people, but it might have been the closest I've ever felt to God, and it might have been the greatest thing I could ever done for myself, as well as my wife and daughter was there and a couple other kids, to just say how in the midst of trauma can you have joy? And I think that's one of the bigger questions you have. You feel guilty being joyful? You're not supposed to have joy. In fact, if you tell people you're having joy, they look at you like there's something wrong with you. You're not dealing with life. Yet my Savior came to give me joy. And it says that for the joy that was set before him, he endured the cross. So what we've tried to do is practice what God has given us. It's painful. There's no doubt. The little steel ball hits the edge every day and bumps in and goes, there's grief again. But I still have to live with joy. I still have to show my kids that in the midst of pain and suffering, there's great growth and possibility. I get so many open doors. Somebody just texted me this morning and said their son, someone they know, took his life on the weekend out in Pennsylvania. Would you talk to him? And I said, absolutely. And so I do think that's the hardest thing in a human condition is in the midst of pain and suffering, how do you find hope and possibility? And that's what Christ is all about. So
I think it was such a brave act for you to not only be willing to continue with your sermon on the Sunday after that and to bring that message. And I can only imagine the impact that had on the people there listening, knowing what had just happened, and to see your bravery up there and then to write about it in such a public way when so many people, I mean, let's face it, suicide it's a real thing and so many people struggle with it. Yet it's a natural instinct for some to want to hide it, to not talk about it. There's embarrassment, there's what could I have done feelings surrounding it. So what advice, because I think for you just like grabbed the horns and you just push forward. So what advice would you have for anybody who's struggling with something, that kind of grief or that kind of
well,
loss?
I think first of all, I hope that they don't see that I was brave, but rather that God enables. I hope that's the message that was there, because I am not brave. But I hope they saw God's empowerment. And then I would say this, as I've said to everybody who's talked to me about this: no one on the planet handles grief. No one on the planet defeats grief. And everybody handles it completely, incredibly different. There's no right or wrong way. If we want to help anybody with grief, the advice I would give is let them grieve the way they want and just come alongside them and just whatever they need for that moment. That's what the Archetypes Attend the Funeral is about, is how do I talk to someone in grief in their archetypal moment. So for instance, I'm a warrior. Warriors don't want to deal with grief. You know why? Because warriors don't lose. This is why I do push-ups. I will not be defeated. The problem is grief, like death, is completely undefeated. And so warriors want to suppress it. So I'm highly aware of that. So my advice would be find a way that you're dealing with it, continue to deal with it, and realize it's a lifelong battle. But yet there's moments of great victory of which you can inspire others, that you can help others in their time of grief, just simply because you're still surviving in yours.
I appreciate that. And I think, like you said, you hope that's the last grief you have to experience. And it reminds me of our youngest son who didn't get the buck that he wanted this past weekend and was devastated and said, Mom, you don't understand. This is the worst thing of my entire life. And so I had to talk to him about there's going to be worse things than that. And at this point, I couldn't convince him. But
Well, it's interesting because I had someone call me right after this, but they wanted to talk to me and said, could I help them with their grief? And I'm like, absolutely. And I am not a pet owner, so I do not understand this. But they had lost a dog that was their family dog for a long time. And as she was talking to me, she was not trying to make the comparison between a dog and my son, but it made me so value the human being experience of grief and how it hits us no matter what it is. Yes, I suppose if you put deer hunting, a dog, and a human being on a scale, they wouldn't be on the same place. But here's what I have learned, Carrie. There is no grief on the planet that doesn't carry some pain to it. And our ability to appreciate the grief that they're in that moment is something I think we're called to do. I didn't get offended that she was talking about her dog the same way but at the same time, I'm not a dog owner. In fact, I'm terrified of dogs, as you know, I think. And so, but to her, there was little difference between our grief. Grief is grief. And so that's all I would add to that part, that when someone is going through grief, these are experiences we get. And as we help them through the grief, the next time their grief might be a little bit more intense for a little bit different reason. Now we've helped them and given them a tool to deal with grief. Helping kids deal with grief is a major thing, because I think one of the things we all just don't talk about it, and therefore we get older and no one's ever told us how to deal with grief.
Yeah, great skill. I want to switch gears a little bit, and I listened to your TED Talk. So let's go back to that storage unit that Robin made you go back to revisit. You had it for, I think you said, 10 years, and the story just hit me deeply. Can you share what that experience was like, what it represented for you emotionally? Because you talked about how hard that was.
So the story is I did the TED Talk on change, 4 archetypes of change. The seeker has an idea and they just think it's just the most wonderful thing. In fact, every seeker, every time they take a shower, they get an idea. And then they bring it to everybody, and the lover is in love with what they're currently doing. And so the tension you feel between the seeker's new idea and the lover, this is the way it should be, is a little bit what we're probably seeing in our country. Let's do things a new way. And then you got the other side that says, no, let's hold on to the old ways. And that tearing is it. And so you have this archetype called the destroyer, the revolutionary, who talks about letting go of things. Well, I'm very much the lover. I want to hold on to things. I need to have things that I love. I'm a comfort kind of guy. So years before, we moved onto a boat and lived on a boat for 10 years, and we needed a place to put our stuff. And so I got a storage unit, but we had too much stuff. So our friend said, let's have another storage unit. He just gave it to us, and we were paying him every month $35 or $45 a month. And so about 10 years into this experience, Robin said, hey, we need to get rid of the other storage unit. I said, what storage unit? And she said, the one that we get from Al. We're paying him $45 a month for it. I'm like, we still have stuff in there? And it wasn't we have stuff in there. It was my stuff we had in there. And it was all kinds of stuff. And so we had to literally pack it up and take it to the dump. And as I'm pushing some of it off the back of the truck and letting go of that, probably was, if you think about it, it's a project into the future. Now I'm having to let go of memories. Now I'm having to let go of a relationship. Now I'm having to let go. So we don't teach people in our country how to let go of things. We do not. And so I pushed it off the truck, and it was like a piece of your heart went out, because those were things I created. They were parts of me. And that's the destroyer archetype of the capacity to move along and let go, which is the famous, wonderful song, Let It Go. Here's the problem. In the middle of that song, when she's singing, Carrie, her red cape comes off. The whole movie of Frozen is her letting go of what people think she should look like, and rather becoming what she wants to be. That's the story. So in the middle of the song, the red cape comes off, which is the queen. She has to now be the royal person. She doesn't want it. And as the cape comes off, under her breath, she says, I didn't look good in it anyhow. Now I'm watching this movie with my 5-year-old granddaughter, Harlow, and I say, Harlow, this is the perfect moment of the destroyer archetype, because she's letting go of and Harlow's just like, shh, Pampa, I love this song, don't talk. But the song, Let It Go, is about moving away from how other people are making you be something, and you're becoming something. And so the metamorphosis in our lives of letting go is the story of grief, is the story of transition, is the story of trauma. So that's what the destroyer was. And getting rid of the shed not only saved us over $450 a month, I got rid of some bad stuff.
Yeah, I love that so much. And I think the older we get, the more we transition and let go of those identities that don't serve us as
Yeah,
much or the expectations of
absolutely.
others, and it's very freeing because it's not just about cleaning out that space or that storage unit. It's about just freeing up the
Hmm.
emotional weight that you carry. I mean, because we hold on to things, like you said, from
Yes,
objects to
yeah,
beliefs and habits long after they have served
absolutely.
us.
How many of you teach your kids how to quit? And most parents are very prideful that they do not let their kids quit. We probably are doing a great disservice to a generation below us, teaching them not teaching them how to quit something that's no longer working. How do you move away from it? But we don't know how to quit things, and so we hang on to all this. And if you work with adults, you're spending the majority of your life helping people let go of things that they probably should have either never grabbed hold of or should have let go of a long time ago. And I think that's the story of my life. God has put so much stuff in my life that I've had to let go and move away from. It just becomes part of who I am. I think of teaching people how to let go of things.
That was actually leads into my next question, because sometimes it's something serious like a relationship, like your first marriage, or it could be just objects that remind you of the past. So, what advice would you give someone who's afraid of releasing something, maybe a possession, but it could also just be a story or a dream, because it might mean losing part of who they feel like they
I think
are?
that's where, again, going back to the archetypes, the lover and the destroyer have a conflict because the lover is constantly holding on and the destroyer is trying to tell them to let go. In fact, I say to people all the time, don't ever tell someone to just let it go unless you're willing to walk beside them. So I think what happens is you have to get a new reframing process of what does this look like. So I don't ever try to get rid of some of those precious memories. Instead, what I try to do is I add to them. The other thoughts are still there. They're never going to go away. It's the concept of Hebb's law that all neurotransmitters fire together, remain wired together. It's kind of like when you smell something, it reminds you of grandma. When you hear a song, it reminds you of somebody. That's Hebb's law. You don't get rid of these things. What you do is you add to the connections. So I think what I'm trying to do with my son Andy, Swiss cake rolls. It was such a great day, such a great day. I didn't think, I didn't really think of March 11th, as you and I just talked about finding him, which is kind of seared into my head. Instead, I was like, he would love that we're having Swiss cake rolls right now. And so I think the way
Mm.
you do this is not try to suppress or move away from, but rather keep what you can keep and want to keep and add to it another memory that creates another page in a chapter of a book that you never intended to be in. But it's another page, and you just keep turning the page.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of simplifying and purging and getting rid of things. And I think that there's a deep connection between that outer world and inner world, for me at least. Like, if my surroundings are peaceful,
Yeah.
I feel more at peace. So here's a challenge for our listeners. As you listen to David, what's one thing in your life that maybe you've been holding on to that you could release this week? Maybe a bigger question is, what version of you are you ready to release so the next version could emerge? And David, you've talked just a little bit about your different archetypes. And so, just for people who haven't read any of your books and any of our listeners, you've mentioned the warrior, the lover. So, just a couple sentences. I know it's a pretty deep issue.
We have an assessment tool we use that has 12 archetypes. And that's what we're referring to. They're kind of categorical in nature. So the books that I've written are about how these behaviors come out. The 12 we use come from an assessment by Dr. Carol Pearson and Humar, and it's a really great assessment. It helps people kind of see how their behaviors work. So archetypes are the behavior you want to act for the moment in time you're in right now. That's kind of what they are. So
Mhm. Okay. I want to go back to the visual you painted for us, because it was very powerful. I loved the story of Frozen and sharing that moment with your granddaughter and taking that cape off. And now you actually have me wanting to go back and rewatch that, because I don't know if I ever really truly watched that. I don't have grandkids yet for like that deep of a message. And so, as we go through those journeys, and people who are listening, we all get in those times in our life where we just feel stuck, and we might be like stuck in this loop of whatever we're dealing with. And I think it's so important for people to recognize, just like your push-up contest, that any movement, as long as we're making small movement, that movement still counts and it's going to get you out of that loop and moving forward. And so we've talked about your storage unit and letting go of things that no longer serve us. So let's talk now and kind of shift about what comes next. How do you take that freed space that you've created and rebuild from something that you're trying to get away from that pain and rebuild, or to step out of that old identity and to step into the life that we are meant
Yeah,
to
it's
live?
interesting. It's a great question because it conjures up, how do I formulate something different than what I'm experiencing? So as I said, the destroyer archetype is the concept of letting go. But if you just keep letting go, you have nothing. If I let go of everything in a room, what do I have left? I have an empty room. If I if I don't let go and I'm the lover and I just keep bringing more chairs and tables and chairs and tables and tables and chairs into the room, what do I have? I have hoarding. Okay, the hoarding concept is the inability to let go. So this balance between the holding on and letting go are a real cool thing. But if I clean everything out and just say, forget it, I'm not going to talk about it anymore, I create a vacuum. And that's where the creator archetype comes in and says, okay, what do I need to replace that with? What can I build within that particular framework? Having to rebuild your life and remake your life without someone significantly in your life is probably, within our human experiences, one of the most hardest things we could ever do. How do you rebuild that? But that's what the whole project of reimagining yourself is all about. What's something new that I can do today in light of where I'm at? How do I do one new thing today that might replace the thing in the past that I had? And so the creator in us says, okay, I want to do this. I want this. So my associates are wonderful people that work for me. At the funeral, they bought for me a wind chime. And the wind chime is to honor, they had no idea that my son loved to be outside. So the wind chime sits right outside my office, and on a windy day, I hear it go. And what it's doing is I put it out there right there because it will create new memories. It reminds me of my son because it's outdoors, and that's who he was. He was outdoors, but it's creating something new. And I had to purposely do something that created a new experience in my life. Now that sounds so minor, but you put that with Swift cake rolls and a few other things, and what we're doing is creating something that allows us to continue to move forward with what we're doing. Creating a book to memorialize, that was in honor for his life. So I think it's replacing with something that you now have some sense of control over and want to create.
Hmm. That was deep. I love it. And I don't think it is a simple act. And just, hearing that wind, just those
Little
little
things.
reminders of him to keep him alive and in your days. And we go through so much in life where we switch, even when your kids grow older, they could still be living with you, but they don't need you as much. And so your identity is changing. And so we just have to go through those changes and find ways to understand that our worth isn't tied to those identities,
Mhm.
if you will.
When we start looking at events in our lives, Carrie, that are traumatic, and again, trauma, it can be, to one person's trauma is not the other person's trauma. I do not dismiss anybody's trauma. I take a pretty broad word with the use of that word. But when you go through trauma, there's pain that you think you can never get through. But I think that's what, in my faith, that's what gives me that Christ wants to use these things to turn them into something good. So I constantly say, how can I make this something better for someone else? What does that look like? My whole being is based on a very bad moment in my life. When I was 16, I was raped by a guy in our church. I went to the pastor of our church and explained, this guy in our church did this to me. He looked at me and he said, you're 16, why didn't you run away? Which devastated me. For 10 years, I had that thought, why? I was 16, why didn't I run? And then finally someone helped me to understand it was in a crawl space of a house. I can give you the details another day. And he's like, well, if it's a crawl space of a house, you couldn't have run. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I couldn't have run. You would think in my life I would want to go back and undo. If I could undo one thing in my life, what would it be? I will tell you that's not it. Because that has made me who I am, and the desire to help people who are in trauma and in hurt. I found a way to channel that pain to do something good in life, and I'm going to do it until the day I die. I'm 71 and I have no desire to quit. But that moment in time, which was a long time ago when you figure 71 and 16, gave me a purpose that I will never, ever regret having. Do I like that happened? Absolutely not. Can I tell you the hurt of that pain? Absolutely. Do I remember it? Yeah, it's a steel ball in my box of life, and it touches the edge very frequently, despite working through it all. But yet at the same time, I'm going to channel that pain to create something new for myself and other people. And if I can do that, I just think that there's a reason I'm here to turn that sorrow into joy, to help somebody else get a moment of freedom from grief. That's kind of the story I would have.
David, with all of the, I mean, let's face it, you're old. You're
Hey,
71 years old. No, I'm just
careful.
kidding. I don't.
Edit
But
that phrase out,
yes, I'm
girl.
kidding. With all of those years and those traumatic experiences, I love your authenticity, because it's rare, your willingness to have that servant heart to share those hard times instead of burying them. And I can see that not only has that helped so many people because of your willingness, but I think that's a big key to you being the man that you are today, that you have been able to overcome so many obstacles. And I think it's truly, we can give God all the credit, but it's also, it comes down to you being brave enough to open up and to share and to grab other people's hands right where they are and to help them walk through their journey of grief and sorrow
Well,
and pain.
I do think it helps when you're
So,
working with people who say to you, David, you don't know what I'm going through. I always say, I don't. I know what I went through. I don't know what you went through. I don't know. I can't experience anybody else's pain, but I can know what pain feels like. That's why I don't dismiss any trauma, because it's all different. I would say God has given me a strength that only comes from Him. And on my wall, you can't see it because you're not looking at it, but it says, this is my daily thing. Be available to provide tools to equip people to do good to the glory of my God. I'm going to make myself available to provide tools to equip people to do good to the glory of my God. And if I can do that every day, all these bad things that you would classify in the category of bad that have happened, I find great solace and great joy knowing that if I can help one other person lift the burden for the day, that's a wonderful thing. So, yeah.
it's a very noble mantra. I love it. You have worked with leaders and organizations for decades, and quite honestly, I believe it's across the nation. And so, for someone who is going through a personal transition, maybe grief, recovery, or a big life change, what leadership principles also apply to that personal growth?
Um, I think one of the key leadership principles in life is this: don't let how you handle the problem become a problem. Every leader is going to have a problem. Somebody said that one day. That was not a quote from David. I learned that from somebody. Don't let how you handle a problem to become the problem. And so I think the leadership principle is, when you're faced with adversity, when you're faced with trauma or grief, don't compound the trauma, grief, adversity by being an idiot of how you handle it. Okay? Find a way to look at the possibility, and it's the innocent archetype that says there's still possibility. When I was in the military, I learned a phrase called left of boom. Left of boom is, you always believe boom is going to happen. Okay? Event, boom! And then event. Leaders have to live left to boom. They have to be ready for boom because we're trying to prevent boom. That's what we're supposed to do. It's called the orphan archetype, the realist. I am looking out for boom. I kept everybody safe from boom today. Yes. Right of boom, however, boom is going to happen. Boom is going to, it might be a small boom, a big boom. What do you do when you're right of boom? Right of boom is called the innocent, the idealist. It says, you know what? Boom happened, but we can get through this. You have, as a leader, when boom happens, don't make another boom and another boom. I believe in our country, it's the number one flaw in the most leaders that we see in public. They not only have booms, they create more booms by how they handle the boom. And so my number one mantra to help leaders in this, for your question, is don't just be left of boom, be right of boom. Don't create a second boom because you handled the first boom like an idiot. So that's how I would say that.
I think that's great advice. And being, I think, as a leader, it's so important to, well, not even as a leader, just as a human, to have that self-awareness, because so often we struggle to maybe move forward because we want change, but we don't want to take time to reflect
absolutely.
on that.
Yeah.
And you have reinvented yourself more than once as a husband, as an author, as a business owner, as a speaker, a husband, father, and you've lived a couple of different versions of David. 71, did you say it's 71 years old,
yes.
right?
Old, I think.
71 years young. What does reinvention mean to you now at
I think
71?
I still have 2 or 3 more lives I want to live. So I'm constantly trying to say, okay, what's the next thing? I literally roll out of the bed in the morning, and one of my favorite verses is Joshua 14:11. It's Joshua wanting to give Caleb, who is 80 years old at this point, the land, his portion of the promised land. He had lived through 40 years in the desert. Him and Joshua are the only survivors in those 40 years. And so Joshua says, hey, Caleb, look I got this valley, this plain. It's got a brook. You can fish all day. Have this. And Caleb says, I am as strong today as the day that Moses sent me. My strength now as my strength was then. And then he says, give me the mountain. There's a hill country out there with giants that are in fortified cities. Give me the mountain. Every morning, that's my prayer. I get up and I say, God, give me a mountain. So I do believe I still have a couple more ways to reinvent myself, or I should say it more pointedly. God still has a couple ways he wants to use me. I don't know what they are, but I hope there's a mountain out there that I can conquer.
That is so inspirational. And I think just in talking and texting with you a little bit, that God's giving you those, and you're getting some tough stuff to deal with and some big mountains to overcome. And it's so inspirational for me to hear in my 50s, because it's hard to leave the version of yourself and to make that transition, because it's so safe feeling back here, and to push yourself outside your comfort zone and to welcome those challenges. It's hard, but I think it's another one of those things that as we get older, we realize that is where true growth and joy exist.
Absolutely.
And come
I just
from.
read a real cool article on aging. Why I'm reading articles on aging, I have no idea. But it talked about the mindset of someone getting older. And I don't have any problem with retirement. I think it's a wonderful thing for many people. It's not mine. I don't have that story in my head, and I don't want it in my head. The article was very fascinating about the concept of having something, a huge purpose above yourself, inspires you to live better, to work harder, and to keep going. And I think probably, if I could say to my fellow 70-year-olds, find a mountain. And I say to young 50-year-olds, you're just kids. You are just children. Find a mountain. And then when you conquer that, find another mountain. And I don't think you'll ever regret any day of your life, no matter how tragic it comes.
When you talk about leaders that you've worked with, and you talk about the mistakes and not to make another one after the boom, and to stay left and then to stay right of that boom, what about the leaders across the country that you coach, that you work with, and you see someone standing at that crossroad of who they were and then who they're becoming? What's the biggest mistake they make?
Being self-reflective and not doing anything about it. The biggest danger of people that I work with are not those who are not self-reflective. I can help them become self-reflective. It's the person who is self-reflective and they do absolutely nothing about it. they see the problem. In fact, a lot of times when we give assessments, people look at the assessment and it's like a mirror. They go, oh, look at this. Yeah, this is me. I knew this was me. Now deal with it, people. This is who I am. My inventories, assessments across the country, we've got tons of great ones. They all have something great to say, and Archetypes certainly is one of those. They're absolutely no good if all they are is mirrors and not microscopes. I mean, I don't have this problem. People that are listening to the podcast can't see that I have no hair. But if I go into a mirror and I look and my hair is out of place, that never happens to David. Back in the day it did. I'm supposed to adjust my hair. If I see I have salad in my teeth, I'm supposed to take the salad out. The problem is reflective people who look at themselves and they see the salad in their teeth and they never do anything. There is they can tell, yep, this is my flaw. Yep, I'm argumentative. Yep, I'm blunt. Yep, I'm not very compassionate. Whatever, and those are all things. Okay, what are you doing about it? Nothing. That's who I am. That's how I was made. That's the most dangerous person on the planet. And they have the attitude of deal with me. Just deal with me.
It's almost like, and I guess I don't really know a kind way to say this, but it's almost an immature emotional state where if they would be a little bit more open and dig into that messy part that's uncomfortable and learn from it and make some changes, even when they're 70, 80, that's where the gold is, and we all have room for growth and should always continue growing.
How I like to frame it is this way. Inside of our lives, we have these little Lego blocks in our lives. In fact, I carry around these the Lego blocks. I actually carry them in my bag, and I'll hold them out, and they're stacked in my hand like firewood. And I'll say to people, could you build a tower out of these 3 or 4 Legos I have if I gave you more Legos? And they say yes. I said, but what if you don't move those Legos? What if I pile them on the table like firewood, crisscross, upside down? You can't touch them. Could you build a tower? And they go, no. Okay, Legos, L-E-G-O, life experiences, growth opportunities. We all have Legos in our lives, and we're trying to build a tower of being a better human, being a better spouse, being a better leader, but we're not willing to look at the life experiences and growth opportunities in our lives. And the theory is that if you want to go higher, you have to go deeper. And reflective people who don't do anything have come to a place where they don't want to go deeper, and therefore they'll never go higher. So you have to be willing to look at your own life experiences and growth opportunities, your Legos. I probably just broke a franchise or a copyright law or something. But I try to use every Lego in my life, and I try to lay it out, make a base, and then try to build on it. Whether it was because someone left me, or because I lost someone, or because of a heart attack, or because I was raped at 16. I don't want any of those things to just be piled there. I'm going to dig deep enough to find a base and use it to build a tall tower of something, whether it's being a better husband, a better father, a better coach, a better friend, a more godly person, whatever it is. So I think what you said is exactly right. They don't want to go deeper, but you cannot go higher.
That analogy reminds me of, I did a podcast earlier on the Jenga game and how something happens, you pull out one of those Jenga blocks and you could toss it off to the side, or you could take it and build that wooden tower even higher.
That's beautiful. That's a good picture of that. And I think that's what coaching and helping other people is all about.
It's very powerful. And sometimes we all need someone else's faith in us, and then we can use that to build on. And I think it's amazing that you have done that for so many people that you worked with. And I know you'll be humble and deflect that, but so I'm going to just not even give you a chance to talk. So David, you have spent decades helping people rewrite their stories. What's one part of your own story that you had to rewrite recently, or maybe even one coming up?
Of all the events that have happened to me, the moment that I understood I was 16 and I couldn't run, when the guy raped me, he brought me into a crawl space. And the hardest thing I could do for the next 10 years was to think that I was guilty. He raped me, but I was guilty because I just didn't run away. That someday I'm going to write a book entitled, You're 16, You Couldn't Run, the stupid things people say to people in trauma. And if I go back over all my life, Carrie, of everything that's ever happened to me, and this includes my son's death. Uh, the moment in time that changed my life was when I was 24, and I came to Christ because someone helped me. He literally sat me down and he said, "Why don't you tell me your real story?" And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" And he knew there was something in there. And I had not told one person this story since I was 16. And October 23rd, 1977, so I guess I was 23, not 24, and he helped me understand, well, if you're in a crawl space, you couldn't have run. And I jumped up from my chair and I said, I couldn't have run. And that was the moment in time that I think it was the hardest and the most glorious moment of my life right there. Don't get me wrong, I have 18 grandkids, 7 great-grandkids. I have a beautiful, beautiful woman who stays with me no matter what. I've been through a lot of stuff. That may be the most glorious moment in my entire life. And I came to Christ, and I realized I was not guilty or shameful. Because shame is such a powerful thing that people carry with them. A lot of times in grief, you're carrying shame. My son took his life. You get a little shame with that as a father. How did I not know that with all this work? How did I not see that? So you carry shame. And that's the day that I realized Christ took my shame. And there was no shame really for me to have that day.
If we could go back and take and just mirror snapshots, just little pictures of David Hulings at 16 coming out of that crawl space, of David Hulings with his first marriage and feeling broken when his wife left him, and David Hulings wanting to help his children and sometimes not being able to, or walking in and finding your son and just feeling so broken. Or maybe even just standing at that storage unit with the 10 years of memories and pain. What would you tell David Hulings at each of those little spots of brokenness?
God's got this. God's got this. No matter what. I'm a reactionary person, Carrie. When something doesn't go right, I react right away. And usually poorly. And I usually have to have someone go, David, God's got this. And let him get it and just do what you know is right to do in your life. And that's what I would tell him. That God, no matter how tragic it may be, God's got this. Just do what's right. Treat people the way they should be treated, even though at that moment in time, they probably don't deserve it. And yet there was many times that I did not deserve it. And someone treated with me with grace and love. And I believe that's the answer to dealing with everything that happens. Just God's in control. Respond in a way that elevates the moment and doesn't diminish the moment.
Before we wrap this up, you've been through so many journeys. And I know that in my life so far, I've been and led a very blessed life, but there have also been a few rock bottoms and struggling. I think that is when you really, during those times, cling to your faith and cling to your faith of God, and growth happens there too, because sometimes to crawl out of those and to climb back to the top of that mountain would be impossible. And the pain would, I just think, linger and hold you back with a weight instead of lighting forward with a flashlight to help you climb back out. So anything else before we wrap this up that you would like to add for anybody going through a transition, dealing with some grief, stuck in that loop?
I would add this. I think in the middle of these things, again, everybody does it differently. But I think the most tragic is when we try to do it alone. Not talking to people, not engaging with people. The day or two before my son took his life, he was with his brother. The day before that, he was with me. He seemed perfectly fine. But his mental health caused him to make a decision at that moment. The oddity here, Carrie, is any other time he was down and out, he would call me. He always called me. And he'd say, Dad, walk me off the cliff. I'm having trouble. And I would walk him off the cliff. We had a great way to just do that, especially in the year and a half before this happened. And at that moment in time, he did not call. He wrote out about a 4-page manifesto of everything that had been wrong and took his life. So I guess if I left you with one thing, it'd be don't do it alone. Someone is always there. I think God put us together as human beings in order for that connection for us to help one another. I wrote this book to give novice people a way to help people who are in grief. I wrote it for people in grief. I wrote it for people who are masters at dealing with grief. But I also wrote it for anybody who says, how do I help a person if I'm going to a funeral? The archetypes show up. What archetype should I show up with, and how do I help? And if there's someone out there that hears this voice and they're struggling with grief and are overwhelmed, that the answer is contrary to what you want to do, but that is find someone to talk to. If you're not that person, get your head out of your social media, get your head out of your work life, and start listening for people who are hurting. And when they give you a cue, be there. I regret the greatest, I don't really live by regret, so I want to be careful how I say this because I don't. But if I had a regret, it's what did I miss the 2 days before when I talked to my son that I didn't hear for a guy who does my work and my skill set. I literally can tell when I go and meet a barista at the Starbucks that something's wrong. How did I miss that? So I think if you need help, talk to someone. If you don't need help, listen for someone. And I think that's the most powerful thing I could leave this with.
Very valuable advice. David, this conversation has truly been a gift. You have reminded us that grief and growth can coexist, and that even in the hardest moments, there's still meaning to be found. And walking that journey, like you just said, finding a friend, finding a family member, finding someone to help lift you up when you're low, and then to be there for others who need you when you're not. You have lived, you've lost, and you have rebuilt more times than most people could imagine, and you've turned it all into light for others, and that is why you are at the top of my list. You are my second guest to have on my podcast, so thank you for showing us what it means to keep becoming and for your faith. So for everyone listening today, maybe your storage unit looks different. Maybe it's guilt, regret, or a belief you have outgrown. But if David's story reminds us of anything, it is this: you can't step into your future if you're still living in your past, and you're never too far gone to start again. If you are navigating loss or letting go of an old version of yourself, I hope today that you're walking away feeling a little lighter, a little braver, and a little bit more hopeful. David, where can people find your new book and connect with you online?
We have a webpage, davidhulingswrites.com.
To everyone listening, if this episode moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear that healing is possible, that growth is not a straight line, and that you're not alone. Thank you for listening to Project U 2.2. And David, thank you for the gift of your perspective, for being vulnerable, and for sharing how to turn loss and grief into
You're welcome.
meaning.
Thank you for having me. And I love what you're doing, and I wish you the best. I hope God just really blesses what you're doing, Carrie. It's a wonderful thing. So great. You're welcome.
I appreciate you. Thank you.